There are many films that fit the label of a shit show, but nothing quite like Mad Max Fury Road. Plagued by war and weather, director George Miller's long-in-the-making sequel faced a decade of delays before he shot a single scene. But once on set, things just got worse. Harsh weather, life-threatening stunts, actor feuds, studio interference, everything about the movie is a prime example of a shit show.
I thought that if you prepared a film well enough, that the film that's in your head, it's just a matter of executing it. And I was quite naive then. What I didn't realize that filmmaking is tough.
It was the mid-70s, and a young Australian named George Miller had just finished his residency as an emergency room doctor. And like most medical professionals who see the horrific violence of car crashes, Miller chose to direct a movie about violence and cars.
And there's no question that Mad Max was influenced by my childhood in rural Queensland. Completely flat roads, loamy soil, heat haze, burnt land, with a very intense car culture. By the time we were out of our teens, several of our peers had already been killed or badly injured in car accidents. Kind of got into me, it kind of disturbed me quite a bit. And I think all those things kind of were part of the mix of the Mad Max films.
With the help of his friend and producer Byron Kennedy and a bunch of their school buddies, Miller directed the 1979 indie classic, Mad Max. The revenge-fueled action drama starred the completely unknown Mel Gibson, cost under $400,000, and took in a worldwide total of $100 million. To put that in perspective, in 2020 dollars, their return on investment was over $350 million. Not bad for a first movie that was mostly shot illegally along the Australian outback. So, of course they made a sequel. Mad Max 2 in 1981, also known as The Road Warrior in the United States, wasn't nearly as big of a hit, grossing less than half of the original. But what it lacked in receipts, it more than made up for with its stamp on pop culture. Miller's precise direction created an action classic that many still consider one of the greatest. And his uncompromising vision is exactly what you think of when someone says post-apocalyptic, as the film invented that visual style, which has since been imitated for decades, from Waterworld to the Fallout games to the Lego movie and even a Utah Highways ad campaign. I thought this guy was Mel Gibson for years. Another sequel was obviously in the cards, but while in preparation, Miller's friend Byron Kennedy, who co-created the world of Mad Max, died in a helicopter crash.
We were like filmmaking brothers, and so that had a big effect. And then there was that sort of need to let's do something just to get over the shock and grief of all of that.
Miller reluctantly started a third Mad Max film, while partially handing the reins over to co-director George Ogilvy. 1985's Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome happily shows the backing of a big Hollywood budget. The film has its own charm and moments, but is widely regarded as the weaker sequel. George Miller decided to move on from the character. For the next decade, Miller inched his way into Hollywood, but mostly withdrew from directing. In 1993, Warner Brothers, who distributed the Mad Max films outside of Australia, hired Miller to helm an adaptation of Carl Sagan's novel, Contact. He worked on the film for 2 years, but in that time the script wasn't final, no budget was submitted, and the only thing the fastidious Miller had truly accomplished was casting Jodie Foster. Warner Brothers fired him without warning and gave Robert Zemeckis the job. Miller sued for breach of contract, and in the 1997 settlement, he acquired full rights to the Mad Max franchise. A year later, 13 years removed from Beyond Thunderdome, Miller crossed a street in LA, and suddenly, an idea popped into his head. What if there was a Mad Max movie that was one long chase, and the MacGuffin was human? Wait, what is a MacGuffin?
Glad you asked, Ian. A MacGuffin is a term commonly used in fiction. Plainly, it's something that moves the plot forward.
It could be, find this person.
Who gives a shit? Where is Doug?
Or find this object.
The stones are in the past. We could go back, we could get them.
It might be something rather pointless.
He peed on my rug.
He peed on the dude's rug.
Donnie, you're out of your element.
Or world-ending.
One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness, find them.
Have a deeper meaning.
Rosebud.
was his sled from when he was a kid. There, I just saved you 2 long, boobless hours.
Or you might never know what it is. Hell, both the Harry Potter and Indiana Jones series have the MacGuffin right there in the title.
And in the case of Mad Max Fury Road, the MacGuffin is Immortan Joe's runaway wives.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
To Miller, once an idea burrows into his head, he'll stop at nothing to get it out. He spent the next 3 years perfecting the script, calling it Fury Road. Once he had it locked, he reunited with now superstar Mel Gibson to pull it off. This time, a clearly confident 20th Century Fox was ready to shell out $100 million to see it through, 10 times what Beyond Thunderdome cost. Production was all set for the end of 2001 in the desolate Namibian desert in Africa. Then, September 11th. The world was rattled, and the US economy fell on shaky ground, forcing the budget to escalate at an alarming rate. So Fox pushed the shooting date to March of 2003. Miller and his team patiently waited a year and a half.
So we wait.
However, once that shooting date approached, the US was preparing for war, and Islamophobia was setting in. This time, travel restrictions made things nigh impossible, and filming in an African country where Muslims might live terrified investors. Fury Road was deserted. By 2006, Gibson said the movie was dead, and that he was getting too old for it anyway. Miller started conversations with fellow Aussie Heath Ledger to pick up the mantle. But Miller, too, decided to move on and pursue a film placed in a different lonely wasteland, Antarctica. He directed the animated feature Happy Feet for Warner Brothers. Apparently the two parties mended their relationship. The film was a big success and won Best Animated Film at the Oscars, so Warner Brothers wanted to stay in the George Miller business. They gave him, of all things, a $200 million adaptation of the Justice League of America. Miller wanted to film in Australia and turn his home country into a thriving production destination, much like how Lord of the Rings turned New Zealand into the production juggernaut it is today. But that film ended up being its own shit show, and was never made. By the time Miller got around to Mad Max again, his work on Happy Feet gave him the idea of just making Fury Road animated. He teased the R-rated 3D anime in March of 2009, but by May, he was back to location scouting in Australia. And in October, Mad Max 4 Fury Road was officially announced to start shooting by the end of 2010, with Warner Brothers producing. The casting rumors immediately started. Gibson obviously was a no, because he was, let's say, not very well liked anymore.
I'm so angry because I don't have any friends. The career is over.
Jeremy Renner fought hard for the role of Max, but Miller went with Tom Hardy after seeing him back-to-back in Bronson and the TV movie Stewart, A Life Backwards. He saw an actor with range.
It was that thing that went the moment Tom walked through the door. I felt that same, whatever that feeling is, that I felt when Mel Gibson first walked in the door 30-odd years ago.
Alongside Hardy, Charlize Theron was cast in a role sizable enough that Miller toyed with shooting 2 films back-to-back. The other being Mad Max Furiosa, titled after Theron's character. Either way, Fury Road was picking up speed. In late 2010, it was actually happening. Crews arrived in Broken Hill, Australia, the same desert location they filmed The Road Warrior. Miller was once again hoping to kickstart Australia's film business. They shipped dozens of vehicles built years ago to the site, constructed a few dozen more, and plowed roads for shooting, just in time for a heavy rainstorm. But that storm was massive, and dropped rain on Broken Hill that had not been seen in over a century. When the cast arrived 2 weeks before production, instead of apocalyptic barren sand dunes, the landscape had bloomed into a wonderland of wildflowers. Dumbfounded and without options, the producers pulled the plug, putting everything into storage, and Theron shaved her head for no reason. Warner Brothers still believed in the project and suggested Miller wait for the desert to dry up and restart then. It didn't. Miller waited a year and a half, yet the flowers remained. Apparently he had enough time to direct a Happy Feet sequel, so it wasn't all a waste, though it was widely panned. He said screw it and decided to head back to Namibia, Africa. In June 2012, all 150 vehicles were shipped to Africa, Theron shaved her head again, and cameras finally rolled on Fury Road. And that's when things got bad. First off, the Namib Desert was a roller coaster of an environment. The first 3 weeks were hounded by unpredictable, blinding dust storms, putting a pause on all filming.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
At the worst of times, temperatures would reach over 110 degrees one day and weirdly drop below freezing on another. And most of the cast weren't exactly dressed for it. Then there was the sheer scale of production and the many ways people could have died on set. Miller knew he wanted his film to never break the laws of gravity, and to him, that meant filming everything for real and not leaning on CG as a crutch. He was adamant that everything had to look dangerous, but doing so would require meticulous planning and some truly harrowing stunts in and around fast-moving vehicles. This film was going to live or die, figuratively and literally, through Miller's stunt team, led by Guy Norris. Norris's first film was The Road Warrior, playing one of the villains, as well as being his own stuntman. He even broke his leg on that movie, so Norris felt an immense responsibility in making sure Fury Road went injury-free. As Hardy said, their methodical professionalism kept things from getting dangerous, or at least not as dangerous. Each day demanded hours of preparation for every vehicle on screen and behind it. Not only was it a safety-first operation, it was also like solving a gigantic math problem. All of this combined made Miller insanely nervous each time he called action. Having crafted this story for so long, Miller, along with co-writers Brendan McCarthy and Nicola Thoris, had pages upon pages about each character and gang. Yet he deliberately wanted the film to have as little dialogue as possible. Therefore, the entire film was laid out in storyboards, to the point that there was no screenplay for Fury Road. Only 3,500 hand-drawn black and white panels of every shot of the movie. For the cast and crew standing in Miller's office, it sold them completely on a project that seemed to have every detail ironed out. But in practice, in the middle of the desert without a script, the cast had little to wrap their heads around what was currently being filmed on any given day. Miller would construct elaborate half-day setups with dozens of vehicles and actors in frame, and only film seconds of it. He had mapped out the whole film in his mind, but it was difficult for him to relay his vision. And he was so focused on the safety of everyone involved, he had little time for the actors and their questions.
You know, I know what I'm doing.
This gnawed at Tom Hardy, and it would turn into explosive arguments with Miller.
And George will ask you to do things which may seem insane, and they are. And then when you see the movie, having been there, and I see what he meant now, and he was trying to explain in the sand when we were out there, and it was a nightmare. A brilliant nightmare, and confusing. You're not really in a movie. You're in George's head.
The actresses who played the five wives were all relative newcomers and terrified by the utter madness Miller had orchestrated. They latched onto Theron as a guide. But Theron herself was having doubts Miller knew what he was doing. Having experienced directors who fail at their promises, she started putting up emotional barriers. Meanwhile, Hardy's insecurities about replacing Gibson got the better of him. Then life started imitating the art. Theron and Hardy entered a relationship gauntlet, driven by exhaustion and survival, frequently bursting into yelling matches.
It set up the two characters to be that, and there were days on the shoot where Tom and I felt that way towards each other, and I think it was impossible not to have that. I think even if you don't believe that material affects you, it's an impossible notion. When you're living something and doing something for 8 months straight, it just is under your skin, and you want it to be under your skin as an actor. And so there were days where I think it was almost just easier for us to show up and deal with each other in that way.
When asked about their time on set and their heavily rumored feud, Theron and Hardy portray a mental and physical crucible where they grew to outright hate each other, but through that, gained a fierce respect for one another. As production continued to fall behind and run over budget, Jeff Robinov, then president of Warner Brothers, ran out of patience. He visited the set in October and drew a line in the sand. December 8th would be the last day of shooting, regardless of how much was done. When that day came, Miller had yet to shoot anything for the beginning or ending of the movie, essentially everything at the Citadel. His movie was forced into post-production with no explanation of why Furiosa was on the run, or why Max was tied to the front of a car, or who the bad guys were, or even worse, no conclusion to any of it.
And this goes on and back and forth for 90 or so minutes until the movie just sort of ends.
That is brilliant!
The cast and crew left Africa, amazingly, without a single injury, but not with a finished film. Miller retreated home. The 6 months of raw anxiety had left him skinny and defeated. He spent the next full year with his wife and editor, Margaret Sixel, cutting the film without a solution. All the while, Warner Brothers kept a watchful eye, constantly wanting the film to come under 100 minutes, possibly brought down to PG-13 rating, and questioned if that Qatar dude really needed to be in it. In June of 2013, Romanov was removed as the president of Warner Brothers, and Kevin Tsuchihara replaced him. Tsuchihara was given the task of figuring out what to do with Mad Max. He met with Miller, who showed him a rough cut of the film, besides the bookends of course, as well as CG. Tsuchihara saw the potential, and elected to give Miller the chance to complete his vision. Miller was granted 3 weeks of reshoots and an extended budget to finish the visual effects. He waited until his stars were available, pulled his vehicles out of storage, and shipped them once again back to Australia, and Theron shaved her head again. That November, Hardy and Theron had cooled off and were ready to reconcile, while also making sure all that pain was worth it. And Miller was given a second chance that he wasn't about to waste. He hammered out his beginning and end sequences, including the climactic crash of the war rig, then drove the massive doof wagon into that for good measure. Ah, catharsis. On the last day, Hardy gave Theron a self-portrait with a note. "You're an absolute nightmare. But you're also f***ing awesome. I kind of miss you. Love, Tommy." As much as people like to say Fury Road was all filmed practically, including George Miller, and was a return to classic filmmaking, the movie actually uses an impressive amount of visual effects. And that isn't a knock at Fury Road. The difference is how seamless it is. Miller smartly blends the practical with the CGI, where everyone walks out of the theater thinking it was all real. Then it all came down to the film's absolute biggest hurdle, the editing room. Miller and Sixel had 450 hours of footage to scour through. For all the battles they had fought and won, the final edit couldn't be where they lost the war. If the film was too slow, or too overwhelming, or too confusing, none of this would have been worth it. For the next year and a half, Sixel constantly held test screenings, then reworked scenes with the feedback. And using a combination of rescaling and speed ramping, Miller and Sixel would maintain the viewer's focus to a singular point between the rapid cuts to keep it from being jarring. A painstaking process that explains the extremely long post-production time. Lastly, Tom Holkenborg's gritty rock anthems crucially helped Sixel tie the film together. Miller and Sixel locked picture 2 weeks before release. 17 years after the one idea jumped into George Miller's head, and 3 years after production started, Mad Max 4 was finished.
I don't think I've ever hugged cast and crew as much as I did on this film when we were done. It was a really emotional goodbye. We had really been through it. We had lived it. We were in it. You know, it's still a very, very close family. And I don't think a lot of movies have that because it's just not enough time where you really feel like you've seen people at their worst and you've seen them at their best. And at the end of the day, you just kind of go, we did it.
In a dark room filled with 6,000 anxious fans, George Miller debuted the first trailer of the fourth Mad Max film at 2014's San Diego Comic-Con. Jaws hit the floor, the doors blew off. Production was so silent for so long, no one was prepared for it, and they certainly couldn't wait 10 months to see it. 36 years since Miller's journey began, and 30 years beyond Thunderdome, Mad Max Fury Road reached theaters on May 15th, 2015. While Fury Road faced stiff competition from Avengers Age of Ultron and couldn't beat Pitch Perfect 2 on opening weekend, the film was still a hit. And thanks to the phenomenal reviews, word of mouth gave the film legs. Bone-crushingly intense, richly detailed, flawlessly edited, and masterfully directed. Audiences hadn't seen anything like it. Fury Road instantly became a modern classic, and topped critics' lists not only for 2015, but for the decade. Upon seeing the film, Hardy atoned for his behavior.
I have to apologize to you because I got frustrated, and there was no way that George could have explained what I saw, which is a relentless barrage of complexities simplified in a fairly linear story. I mean, I knew he was brilliant, but I didn't quite know how brilliant until I saw that. That's my first reaction was, oh my God, I owe George an apology for being so myopic. It's true.
It was nominated for 10 Oscars, including Best Director and Best Picture, a rarity for action movies. It won 6.
What another lovely day.
One of them being for Margaret Sixel's editing. Miller fought tooth and nail to bring his vision to life. It may have cost him years of misery and dragged others into it, but on the other side, he crafted a film for the ages and set the scene for the future of the franchise. Oh, god damn it!